People enjoy a lot of different things, but one hobby that I can't say I've met very many fans of is getting ripped off. To which some of you might say, what about life? Most people are fans, and that's the biggest rip off of them all. Working hard your whole life for the reward of more work. When it comes to getting ripped off, the rules are very simple. You pay more for something than you felt it was worth or should have cost. And hey, if you're frugal enough, everything is a rip-off. This bread bag clip I was excited to add to my collection, part of it was chipped. What a rip-off. When it comes to rip-offs in the gaming world, most people will probably immediately think of the prices of games themselves, whether it be a retro game on the secondhand market or games for the current systems. But while price is certainly a factor when it comes to the value of a game, the other major factor is what you get for paying that price. In other words, the game itself. And most people would agree that overall quality is most important. I mean, right? Otherwise, what would it be? Pause menu music? But the thing that gets brought up a lot that I don't agree with as much is the length of a game. Most people will gladly say quality over quantity, or in the case of a video game, quality over the length of a game. I mean, I've never heard someone say, yeah, I don't mind a game being kind of mediocre if it takes a long time to play through. And not to say that length and quality are mutually exclusive, but one of the most common criticisms you'll find of longer games is that they are full of padding, time-wasting activities that appear to be there just so the publisher/developer can tout how massive the game is. Have you ever seen a game market itself this way? I haven't. And if you like any of these games, just pretend there's a different game in its place. Again, let me be clear. I do think a game can be both really long and really good, but the way games being shorter has been stigmatized seems really unfair. And of course, being a retro gamer, you can see how this is a criticism I'd be interested in defending against, seeing as many retro games tend to be shorter. But how short are they really? Quick little question for you. Have you ever played a longer game, whether it be older or newer, and when you finish the game, don't get me wrong, maybe you enjoyed it, but you felt relief for having finished it? Like, thank goodness that's over. And on the flip side, are there any shorter games you can think of where the idea of playing them again gets you excited? I can think of a few. I've been playing Sonic 2 since I was a kid. Finished the game many times, but not really, since I always want to play it again. And plenty of other games that I intentionally make the time to be able to play through again and again, in addition to playing games I haven't before. I think that replay value doesn't always get looked at the right way. Typically, when it comes to modern games, replay value is thought of in terms of stuff you can do after you beat the game, or stuff that makes each playthrough a little different. For some people, stuff you can do after beating a game is stick it on the shelf and then occasionally reminisce on the time you had with it. But what about a game being replayable because it's just really fun to play through? Is that not good enough? My sweetie pie enjoys the replay value of waking up to my face every morning. And by the way, the replay value of a game based purely on how fun it is to play through could apply to both shorter games and longer games, with the main difference being that shorter games have greater potential to be replayed since, you guessed it, they don't take as much time. I've probably put more time into playing Tears of the Kingdom for my one single playthrough of it than I have playing through Donkey Kong Country countless times. And believe me, I've played Donkey Kong Country many a times. Which game has provided me more value? I really liked Tears of the Kingdom, but without question it's Donkey Kong Country. I think the whole idea of needing a game to be a certain length becomes especially overrated as a strapped-for-time adult, too. As a kid, the length of a game was more critical because you might have to wait until your next birthday or the holidays to get another game. So, a longer game would be beneficial to fill up all that free time you'd have until the next game you'd receive. Not that playing our favorites to death wasn't still awesome, but as an adult, you likely own more games, but have less time to actually play them than you did as a kid. How often do you see an adult gamer say, gosh, I just don't have anything I can play right now? If you have said that, your backlog would like to have a word with you. But regardless of how much time we have to play the games we've bought, for many people, it comes down to the principle of it all. Why should you pay more for something that had less work put into it than something else that costs the same but had more work put into it? To which I'd say, first of all, how do you even know how much work was put into it? Sakurai was reportedly hospitalized after physically collapsing because he was working so hard on Melee, often for stretches of 40 straight hours without sleep. How does that make you feel about the value of Melee? And don't worry, Sakurai, I'll take naps for you in honor of the game. Aren't I considerate? Typically, one way people like to determine how much went into a game is to just look at the budget. Not that people necessarily look up the budgets of games. How many games in your collection do you know the production budget of? In most cases, we just assume that taking a can of beans out of a drawer physics in RDR2 could not have been cheap. Sometimes I think the effort that went into a game can be undervalued too. If you watch one of the videos about the making of Cuphead, the work that went into that game is bordering on insanity, to the point it would be hard to argue against the game costing full price, but nope, $20, because it's not a super long game. And kudos to Studio MDHR for only charging that, but I still feel their effort is undervalued by the average consumer, and that's why we don't get more games that are crafted as meticulously as Cuphead was. I don't blame the game for being difficult because it forces people to look at all the art and animation a little longer, making things more difficult to make them last longer. To make bananas last longer, sometimes I eat them with the peel still on. The thing is, if somebody is deciding whether or not to buy a game, they have every right to make that decision based on their personal expectations, whether it be how long the game is, how much side content there is, what the game looks like, how it runs, how good the pause menu music is, how skeptical they are the price is just gonna drop soon after. All I'm saying is that I think it's at least worth taking a look at how that perceived value before purchasing ends up panning out once everything is said and done. To bring back an earlier example, I've gotten so much joy out of Donkey Kong Country that the game is practically priceless. Seriously, you could offer me $2,000 for it, and I'd decline. Actually, I suppose I'd accept, but then just buy another copy of it. And while it would have been unfair for me to have been charged $2,000 for the game originally, I can still feel like I more than got my value's worth for what I did pay for it. By the way, if anyone is hungry to pay $2,000 for a copy of DKC, there's always the Blockbuster competition cart. I paid $10 for my regular copy. That's gotta be one of my best purchases ever. Well, along with any banana I ever bought. But contrast that with let me be clear, some of the people who bought Tears of the Kingdom. Of the over 20 million copies of that game that sold, while a good percentage of people played it to death and loved it, I'd bet a good amount also only ever made a small dent in it. Heck, maybe they just picked it up because it was hyped to the high heavens, but maybe for one reason or another, it just became another backlog casualty. Okami says hi again. In any case, how much of a value did a person get for their $70 if they never even got to experience a large majority of all the content that game was chock full of? What's kind of bizarre is that a game being really long can even be seen as a downside for some, like, geez, another long game? How am I going to play it? Personally, I just want a game to be really good, regardless of length. and I tend to own not as many long games as short games. Funny enough, Final Fantasy IV is my favorite game in the series. Besides the fun story, I really loved the pacing of the game, beating it in 20 hours, which is short for an RPG, but because I always have plenty of games to play, I don't need any of my games to be longer than they are, often preferring games to be on the shorter side for the most part, so long as the creators of the game deliver what feels like a solid product. I'm usually okay with it, and smaller games will often be at least somewhat cheaper anyway, assuming we're talking about current releases. Now, at this point, some of you may be thinking, you dirty dog tricked me into a conversation about modern games when the channel tends to focus on retro games. Well, not to worry, my friend, because it all relates back to retro games. Because, you see, the obsession with longer games in modern gaming culture affects the way people look at retro games, which is a problem for me because I want to see the younger generations get into retro games. Among many other factors, people will sometimes look at older games as lesser because they're not as long, like being a shorter game makes it outdated and not hold up today. Furthermore, it seems to scare developers away from making shorter games, which kills the chances of certain genres having new games made for fans of those genres, with the big exception being, of course, indie devs or smaller teams. A beat 'em up or shoot 'em up wouldn't really make sense as a 40-hour game though. Samba de Amigo doesn't have a 40-hour campaign mode either. Not that that stops me from playing it for 40 straight hours. Eat your heart out, Sakurai. And while sure, bigger companies might publish certain games in these genres, they often delegate the actual development to a smaller team. To me, this is what has always made retro games hold up. These genres were being made by the top-tier development teams in the industry. It's a rare occurrence we get something like a 2D platformer nowadays from one of Nintendo's top teams, and even still, no pixel art. But there you have it, my thoughts on how we perceive value and the problems I have with it. I really think the gaming industry could benefit from not being so obsessed with marketing the scope of games. Ultimately, I think a lot of it comes down to how easy it is to market the size of a game rather than its quality. If a game is huge, that's easy to understand and explain, harder to argue with. If a game is good, somebody can easily just say, no, it's not. And because a lot of people equate the size of a game to money well spent, it works. Otherwise, the industry wouldn't do it. It may not seem like the industry listens to us, but they do listen to our wallets. But those are my thoughts. I would, of course, be curious to hear what yours are, both in terms of what I said as well as what you think. So with that, leave a comment down below, and I will see ya in the next video.
He's the Retro Bird, yeah, and he's talking about video games.